Hi, welcome to week 2 of Nonprofit Human Resources with City Vision University. I'm Andrew Sears, and I'm here with Angie Kreiner, who has worked with over 70 nonprofits, providing consulting with them on their nonprofit human resources strategies and issues and policies. And this week, we're going to be focusing on hiring staff, in particular, getting into the nitty-gritty details of job descriptions, interviewing, and all of that process. So, Angie, you want to just start off on why does hiring well matter?
Sure, absolutely. Hiring well matters. As you can see, we mentioned stewardship, culture, and cost. We talked about stewardship last week in the introduction. We've been entrusted with employees. They very practically are the largest budget item in most organizations, but they are the most critical for an organization to actually carry out and to fulfill its purpose of existence. So it's a responsibility and an accountability from a stewardship perspective. In order for an organization to even be true to why it exists. Secondarily is culture. People are the greatest influencer and contributor. If you want to change your culture, then you change the people who are in your culture, and that is critical. Hiring key people who are essentially culture changers, culture enhancers. They're going to pioneer a new thing, and that is so critical in the process of hiring. It is staggering to me that you can work really hard to get a great group of people together. And I've seen this happen. They're all on the same page. They're all feeding the culture. A few wrong hires, a few people who don't fit and have the influence and or decision making, and everything just becomes upside down. So culture is critical, and hiring well, every single hire matters to that. And third is really practically, it's cost. Employee turnover is immensely expensive. There are numerous sources out there that will tell you the frequency with which people leave their positions, and it's staggeringly high. If you don't win people over and get them engaged in the first really 4 months, then you are going to lose them like nobody's business shortly thereafter. And the cost to rehire and retrain is expensive, not only in money, but it's a killer on morale and time. So I've often said, if we do one thing, if we can take one thing first, and that is we hire people who have sufficient general and spiritual maturity related to the job for which they're applying for. If we just do that, it will solve numerous problems within organizations.
Yeah, great. And I know that you've seen this on the other side. So, okay, that's, why it's important, but you've also seen, working with many organizations, what happens if you mess it up. So
Yeah.
not that we want to be fear driven, but, we want to learn from reality, and you've gotten a lot of reality in working with organizations. So.
Yeah. So just to hit these really fast, I mean, common hiring mistakes. I don't think any of these are surprising. I think you guys have probably seen them all, or had to clean up the pieces, or at least whatever from all of these things. These are all correctable. That's the great news, is that it's easy to write this type of situation. If you have any role in hiring, keep this list in front of you so you make sure that you don't float off the deep end. And one other thing I would add to this list is don't do someone a favor by hiring their cousin's brother's best friend, the pastor's brother-in-law. That I see this all the time, and it doesn't go well. You need to stay focused on hiring based on the position and what the organization needs, and not all this other stuff, not any other reason. So.
Okay, great. And I do a lot of hiring as a president of a university, and I've been the executive director of a nonprofit for over 20 years. One of the probably most referenced quotes out there is Jim Collins. He wrote a book called Good to Great, and he says, the two things you need to do is you need to get the right people on the bus and get the right people in the right seats on the bus. So whenever I'm hiring, that's one of the things that I think about first. So the right people on the bus is their alignment with the organization's mission and values. Some organizations, that's all they care about. So they're full of people who they really believe in their mission, but no one's in the right seats. So, and it's dysfunctional and everyone is fighting and you have these huge fights because you hired someone for a senior accounting position and they've never been trained in accounting, and that's a pretty critical, position. So there you have to have the alignment of skills and personality type with position. So, and the accounting's actually a good example. Someone who's accounting needs to be detail oriented. You can't be a big picture person, and every penny counts in accounting. And often this is competence. I've heard this called character. I don't like to use that as character because I think that character is a part of it, but I think it actually has more to do with if is there alignment with the mission. So someone could have great character and be a Christian, but if they're not called to serve the poor and that's your mission, then there may not be a values fit. So I've worked with over 100 organizations that have partnered with us, and I've seen probably the biggest challenge, if I had to say, what is the biggest HR problem that I've seen across the 100 organizations that we've worked with? It's that they can't afford to pay the right people for the right position.
Mhm.
So they can't get the right person on the bus, so they compromise. They get someone who's misaligned with the organization's missions and values, and that creates mission drift. You start to hire, if you're a faith-based organization, you start to hire people who, okay, they go to church every now and then, and you don't really pay attention, is their faith vibrant? Or, if you're focused on the poor, you start to hire, 95% of your people come from the business world, and all of a sudden you're a corporation, you're not, a ministry anymore. That becomes a problem. Or get the right, you get people who believe in your mission, but they can't do the job. So, the four solutions, and one of these, really isn't a very good solution. Just be willing to live with a certain level of dysfunction. And a lot of nonprofits, whenever they're small, they can't always get the right people in the right bus. The other, and this is where I've invested, is just invest a lot in recruiting, invest a lot more in training, raising up people from within, and to do less to be able to pay people more. Those who work with the poor and work in at-risk communities, we always want to serve one more person. But the reality is that starts to create too much dysfunction, because we say, well, why not hire two people rather than one and pay them each half, but you end up having dysfunction because you get two unqualified people and then they fight with you and you fight with them, and then you create dysfunction in your organization. So that's a little of my advice. Always, whenever you have an organization, you're going to have some sort of recruitment strategy funnel, and this has been our approach. And Angie, depending on you know other organizations might take a different approach, but we usually cast a fairly wide net. And then we have extremely effective screening. Now, others people don't want to cast a wide net because they don't want to attract the wrong people. But for us, we often post on many job boards. We post to our website. We do an email blast. And we get a lot of applications. But the key screening element is we have automated screening questions. So, we ask, are you a Christian active in your local church? And are you, basically we ask questions that have to do with the mission alignment. We ask, if it requires a bachelor's, do you have a bachelor's? And that's going to filter out some people. And then we have a way to score them before we do interviewing. Then often I have a standard questionnaire of what I'll do. But I'll send a custom questionnaire. Sometimes, you want to start with something standardized, but there may be they didn't answer a question that clearly, or things along those lines. So you can add some questions to that, and then you do final scoring, and you interview them. You select candidates to interview, so 5 or 10, and then ultimately you get down to the final interviews. Now, I'm kind of a marketing person, so I like funnels. I think about the world in terms of funnels. Other people are, I'd rather start with 5 really strong candidates, and so you're going to have a much more narrow funnel. So it kind of depends on what you're trying to do, and with the position, how open you are to hiring someone from outside, your organization. So, um, so I'll turn it back over to you, Angie, for your part.
Okay, great. I'm a huge fan of the wide funnel as well. The key really is you guys have to ask yourself how much time do you have and how effective and adept you are with technology and screening. Absent the ability to make many of those functions electronic, like Andrew just described, you will spend a pretty significant amount of time in response and screening. So you really have to kind of gauge that. These are some other really common job postings, trying to give you some specific resources to think through that should provide you some benefit. First is your own website. You definitely have got to think through your employment page and put as much information out there as you believe to be beneficial to direct people, link them to the right job description or other requirements of the job, if that may be the case. Some of these are really common. Indeed, Craigslist and LinkedIn are all very commonly used. I will say that I think that they're a little more used by certain demographics than by others, and some of it will depend in your region and your area. You can boost or pay for some additional exposure on all of these venues, but you can also, in most of them, find some free posting opportunities as well. And again, I think the key for all of them really is to put some of those screen out questions in there, like Andrew mentioned. Be unapologetic, like this requires an individual who is vibrant in their relationship with Christ and wants to share that with others. Has an exposure to working with people who have been through trauma. Whatever that is, you've got to really put the screening around it. LinkedIn, I feel like, has gotten better with their posting. You can also post free. You can also set all kinds of your own amounts of money that you want to. I still think that the most successful result from LinkedIn comes from LinkedIn stalking. Is you doing your own proactive research to find the kind of person that you want and need within the LinkedIn community. Citygate Network, for those of many of you are familiar with it because it is formerly Association of Gospel Rescue Missions, and they actually have a job posting board as well. Local or regional nonprofit consortiums. Nearly all nonprofits, regardless of kind of what your focus is, are part of consortiums or groups that are local and regional. And many of those agency shares create job boards for the local and regional area. So it's worthwhile to find out if you go to a community roundtable, if you're part of the homeless collaborative initiative or anything else within your area, check into that because you guys can, amongst each other, share those leads. Facebook, I mean, is very common. Nonprofit Center for Excellence. There's a national chapter. There's many local regional chapters as well. I'm a huge fan of going after area colleges, universities, tech and trade schools, and seminaries. There's two aspects. One is the current student body, and one is you want to get into the alumni. So you want to go figure out who is responsible for alumni relationships, because that would be of a more mature job type, as opposed to those entry level or newer people coming out with maybe social work, case management, maybe new for chaplain responsibilities, bookkeeping or accounting, but you want to tap into both of those. Partner agencies and churches, you guys should have within your own database, whether you use Razor's Edge or something else, the ability to select partner agencies in support of churches, your volunteer lists, and you want to do an e-blast to those people. It's a broad cross section of individuals who already, in theory, know who you are and support what you do. So you're starting off on better footing. I noticed I did Center for Nonprofit Excellence twice, so maybe I'm just a fan. I don't know. There are also some really great trending apps, and this link will take you to apps that are trending, and that really hits the younger segments, I think I want to say, more so than the older ones. And we're going to touch on this later, but for the first time in our nation's history, we have 5 generations represented in a workplace. And I think in nonprofit organizations, we tend to catch the full 5 for a couple reasons. One, Andrew mentioned before, we don't always have the money to pay people in their prime for the job that they are most skilled at doing, which means that we either tend to get people who are on the first upcoming or upward rise of their job, or they've already really kind of hit what they wanted to do from an income generation standpoint, and they're looking at the back half meaning contribution. And so we get people at the latter point of their work careers. And so it's important to really know how to market to all of those segments if you're going to do a good job in recruiting. Ministryjobs.com and christianjobs.net are both commonly used organizations or websites. I will say that I have not had nearly as good of luck with those two job sites as I would have hoped. I actually have better luck with the first things that are listed, but I think that it's worth throwing out there because especially if it's a cost-effective measure, then it's worth a shot.
Yeah, and I'll list some of the other ones I've used also since I do a lot of recruiting. So Christian Community Development Association, for those who are affiliated with that, similar to
Yes.
Citygate, is a network. Idealist.org is a job posting for nonprofits. I often use ZipRecruiter for a couple reasons. One is it posts to a bunch of different sites for me. But the other thing, and in addition to job posting websites, a lot of big organizations have applicant tracking systems, or sometimes those are built into their HR systems. And why I like ZipRecruiter is it has a built-in applicant tracking system that allows me to create custom questions. So usually what I do is I post to 10 different ways, but then I link them all through ZipRecruiter. Um, and your organization may have different approaches. I used to post to monster.com. I haven't seen as much on Monster. I don't know if you've Andy have had much success. Especially Christian colleges, you can post to those usually for free. So if you have local Christian colleges, then those can be pretty attractive. And yeah, so let's go ahead and go to the next. So this is one of the key quotes you often hear: hire slow, fire fast. Why don't you fill that out
All
for us?
right. So really, you should take your time in hiring. If you take your time in hiring, then it should make evident that if you're going to have a problem later, then you've already done the check and balance, the due diligence to say, hey, walking in the door and in the first few months, we made this decision because we believe there to be a values alignment, a call, a ministry, a competency to be able to do the job. And if on the back end, what you're seeing are big holes in that, you don't need to go through and typically spend a ton of time. If you've done the work up front, then the firing, if it comes to that, should move pretty quickly. So you want to spend time to hire the right people. And that means before you ever open the process, defining what you need and what you want before you ever start it. You want to look at the position description and figure out, do you need licensures or certain degrees, prior experience? What things are required to do the position well? Andrew mentioned accounting. If someone has never done any fundamental bookkeeping, doesn't know accounting principles, doesn't understand nonprofit accounting, best standards, that's going to be a pretty big black hole of time to fill that gap. And it's not, you don't need to do it. There's enough other people out there who can do it. The job description, you really want to think through, and if you have one, revisit it, make sure it's current. And we're going to spend more time looking at that later, but you want to think through what is required for this job in order to fill the role that has to be met within the larger ministry. I did hit character traits, and that is broad, even though Andrew isn't a fan of just that word. It is a broader trait saying, what is this person, what benefits in this position? Do we need someone who's personable? Do we need someone who is highly ethical, diligent, collaborative, whatever it is? You really want to think about that beforehand. And the interesting thing is that is not just related to the position, it's related to the team and the department in which they're going to work. Often the successes are measured by the whole team and the whole department. And so if you are missing certain traits, or the team would particularly benefit from traits, you need to include that. And for religious organizations, again, it's a faith alignment. As an organizational religious exemption, it may be a requirement that everyone has an expressed relationship with Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. However, the maturity is going to vary wildly, and that is fine, because you need to think through for the different positions, the level of maturity that's necessary related to their personal faith, which aligns with the organizational faith beliefs. And then you want to advertise in such a way, now that you've defined what you know you need to really put that forward so that people who aren't that, whatever that might be, go, yeah, that one's not for me. And they screen themselves out. If you're a faith and religious organization, you really need to know, and I get calls on this all the time. We have a guy on our board who used to do HR at the bank, and he said we can't say that we're a Christian organization. Well, that's because at a bank, you can't advertise for a
Right.
Christian. People don't understand that within HR, you've got government, you've got public sector, and then you've got private sector. Within your private sector, you've got private for-profit and private nonprofit. And then within nonprofit, you've got general organizations that are charitable but are public charities versus private charities versus 501c3 religious charities versus churches. So there's so many different categories that determine what you can and can't say. If you are a faith or religious organization, you can advertise your openings with that faith forward requirement, and you should do so. So these are just some sample languages that might be, well, that hopefully are somewhat offer some assistance in what we just talked about. So.
Yeah, and Angie, let me speak to this point because I've posted a lot, and I've noticed more recently, as the world's become more polarized, this didn't happen until the past few years, but even now posting on these public job boards, some of them have said, you can't post a job posting that sounds discriminatory. Now, first of all, I'm saying the Supreme Court's ruled we can, because, it's like saying, do you want, a Jewish rabbi teaching at your Christian church or your Muslim,
yeah, you don't want a Christian preacher at the Muslim church. They don't want
yeah,
that
exactly.
either.
So, but you can't explain this to someone who's reviewing like 100 job postings an hour, and and they're not the government. So honestly, they can discriminate against you. So what I've done to address that is I just post a job posting, and then I have questions in the questionnaire that address that. I make it clear in the job posting that we're Christian, and I put whatever language that they'll allow. So I basically push them on the language, but putting in, what are the requirements for the job, if they had a field of like post 1, post 2, post 3 requirements, and one of those is being a Christian, I just put it somewhere else so it didn't get triggered by their system, because it's common sense. A lot of people realize this. It's the same thing with political parties. If someone's a Republican congressman, they don't have to hire a Democrat to be their chief of staff, right? So and it comes down to common sense, but a lot of people don't realize that. But honestly, this is probably the most important thing for a faith-based organization for 2 reasons, to be clear on this. One is, if you don't do this and if you're not consistent, then you'll get sued and you'll lose. But the other thing is, the number one way organizations get secularized is from this. So they start to hire people who, in some organizations, they're, semi-secular faith-based organizations, and this isn't a critical issue for them. But if you do not want to be semi-secular and you're concerned about being secularized, then this is probably the most important issue. Having this as a requirement for your especially as you move up more senior. The Salvation Army has tiers. And, they have contractor positions where you don't need to be a Christian. And I think their staff positions, you need to be a Christian. And then they have officers where you not only need to be a Christian, but you need to be a part of their denomination. And I think any organization probably is going to think about that, like, okay, how strict you need to be at each level. And I think just thinking that through is important. So.
Yeah, I do want to say that we will talk about that more when we get to legal compliance areas, because especially with recent legislation, it's important to understand the differences between an organizational religious exemption, a BFOQ, which relates to a position, and then a ministerial exception, which relates to an individual and is more related to preventing lawsuits and or related things. So we'll definitely talk about that more, but you're right, it's critical. Interesting though, I do want to say that when I post on behalf of rescue missions, I haven't had in years a pushback from any of those other entities for using that language. When I did, it was mostly out of California, just because California tends to be more legal heavy than any place else. And so it is, you're right, it is critical to take a look at how can you get that information out there. And another thing you can do is just link it to your website. And so that people then have to, if they want more information, they can also link to another place that's no longer within, say, Indeed, and then you can give them more information that way too.
Yeah, and part of what I did for my own template is I looked for a large organization that knew how to do this better than me, and I looked at their job postings. Like Liberty
Yeah.
University, they have like 1,000 job postings. So I looked at the language they used, and then was like, okay, that looks pretty good. So I'm going to use something like that. So many of you could do something like that, and just look at World Vision, look at some of these big organizations that are going to be clear on their standards, but at the same time, they're not going to do it, because there's also ways you can post it to make it that it sounds like you're being discriminatory, and you don't want it to, from my perspective, it's not discriminatory and illegally discriminatory if there's a common sense reason why it needs to be there. So anyway, we can go into that more later. So all right, go ahead and do the next slide if you want. So
Okay, sure. So the other thing is to establish and follow a process. You want to collect applications and questionnaires and review that based against what you need. So like Andrew mentioned, I'm a huge fan of using a questionnaire. I tend to have one that's more general and then one that's more specific for the positions, especially when those positions require certain things. I want to know their philosophy of ministry. I want to know what they think causes homelessness and what long-term solutions might look like. I want to know what their definition of grace is. Those are things that I begin to put in there, because the other thing I've learned over the years is that people don't interview equally. And there have been many times when you've got a candidate who is a fantastic interviewer, but that was the best of what they had to offer. On the flip side, I've had people who were not as shiny in the interview, but it turns out they were the rock star employee. And so, especially for questions that pertain to philosophy, thought, approach, experience, examples, people who are not wired to respond in an effusive manner will not do as well unless they're given an equitable opportunity to complete the information the same, which I find a questionnaire does. People can take as long as they want to choose to put forward the information that they think is most important. So I think it's critical. So following the process, get the information out there, get it back, take a look and say, do we hit number one? Is there a faith alignment that we can tell? And do they have the fundamental credentials that are required? Then you want to start to conduct an initial interview. And sometimes you can't even answer the first questions until you do that phone interview to confirm the fundamental requirements. It's always interesting to me that even though I ask the faith question a couple different times, usually once in an application and again in a questionnaire, there are times when even between those two approaches, I'm still not really clear. And it takes that phone conversation to make it clear. Subsequent interviews, then you want to kind of determine what's going to get asked. And I don't mean everything, because I really think that when you have like 6 questions, that's all you can ask them all the exact same of everybody, kind of kills the process. People don't interview the same, and they're not the same, and information comes up that you need to be able to pursue. But I do think that it's important to predefine a few questions that you will ask of every single applicant for the sake of equity and consistency, and so that you're comparing information apples to apples rather than apples to lollipops. So, and the other part of that is it is so important to train everybody who's going to be part of that interview process, because this is another great area: good intention, bad course of action. People will ask questions that they're not allowed to ask within an interview and or the hiring process, and that's usually because they didn't know. So you really want to not assume that people who are hiring know what to ask. You want to ensure that you guys meet together and review questions and cover what they can't ask. Now, there's federal law that determines what can and can't be asked within the hiring process, but there's also state. So it's important to take a look at what your state requires as well, because some states add things that aren't in the federal requirements, such as marital status. So often for Nonprofit organizations, especially homeless or rescue mission focused organizations, will say, "Are you married? Tell me about your family." Well, in some states, you can't ask that question, not at that point in time. You can say, "Tell me about yourself." And if they choose to offer it, that's great. But it's critical that you really predefine, pre-coach your interviewers, and then you take a look at, are we asking sufficient questions that address both the heart and the head? So are we getting to the competence and to the personality, the alignment, the character, all those other pieces? Have we sufficiently addressed what needs to be addressed?
Yeah. Now, Angie, I actually have a question on that. So these illegal questions. So if they bring it up that they're married, do you just have to leave it at that, or once they bring it up that you're married, can you have a follow-up question, on that? And how do you view the boundaries of things like that?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's just a normal conversation. And so, depending on how they share that information with you, it may be possible and okay to ask a question, but but you don't want to follow it up with another illegal question. So if they say, "Oh yeah, when I was on a missions trip, I met my wife or my spouse when I was on a missions trip in the Philippines." Well, then a follow-up question you don't want to ask is, "Oh, well then was your spouse born in the Philippines?"
Yeah,
Because now
gotcha.
you're getting into some origin area, and even though they're not the direct employee, you're starting to probe into areas that you're really not supposed to be in.
Yeah,
Um, but I mean, if it's a general thing like, "Oh, that's great. You guys were in college together. Where'd you guys go to college?"
right.
It kind of depends.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. Okay.
yeah,
Gotcha. All right. So, part of what you're going to be doing in this week's assignment is you're going to be building what we call, in the major project for this course is what we're calling a nonprofit manager's HR toolkit. This week is basically the hiring toolkit. So your organization may already have some standards that they use for job postings or things along those lines. And if they do, then use those standards. But if they don't, then you need to follow some of the best practices in this course. And even if your organization has standards and it's not following all the best practices, you will want to probably design your job description using some of these best practices. So part of the idea of this course is that we want to improve whatever processes you have in your organization. So go ahead and if you want to cover this slide, Angie, but I just wanted to give kind of an overview of the big picture.
sure. Okay. General application form, again, one of my big things is, especially if you're a religious or faith employer, do not use one that you purchase off the shelf or ordered from the internet. There are typically statements and questions on the standard forms that just don't apply to us. And you want to include information and questions on your form that are relevant to your workplace. Um, I can't tell you how many times I've run into solid faith organizations who are unclear again that they're really allowed to ask about their faith. And so they'll ask questions like, "How do you spend your Sundays?" Because they're unafraid or uncertain to ask, "Please share with us your personal testimony or how you came to know Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior." You know, be bold, ask those questions, get them in there. A questionnaire, we've already talked about that, and there's some samples for you to work from as a consideration as well. And then a job description. I get that these are not glamorous. Believe me, I get it, but they are so they're so usable, and they're so useful in the process and ongoing relationship if you do them right and if you actually set them up to be used. So defining the whole purpose of the position itself within the organization, making sure that you've defined what the essential duties and responsibilities, as well as skills and qualifications, which include active, vibrant relationship with Christ, skilled in teaching and leading devotion. All of those things that are part and parcel should be included. The working conditions and physical factors is the area that I think people do the worst, honestly. They either do a cut and paste from some generic thing that they look up, and it's all the same for every position, which means it's not applicable. This is where you can really meet the ADA requirements, spelling out what the Americans with Disabilities, if there are things that are required, if someone has to for example, working in a center for women and children that does not have an elevator, but has 3 levels, the requirement for every single person who works in that center for women and children is that they can pick up and carry 40 pounds up 3 flights of stairs, because on occasion they need to pick up a child or they need to pick up some other thing that needs to get carted up those stairs. That's a requirement of the job. The other things I include is if you work in an overnight shelter, you want to think about things like the environment may be odorous due to clientele, lack of personal hygiene, and other related factors to homelessness. I've literally had somebody take a job in an overnight homeless shelter and then come to their boss and say, "God, it really smells." You think? I mean, so these are the areas that are critical, because when you ask people if they can fulfill the job description with or without accommodation, and they say yes, and you've done a good job in this area, you have protection. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Experience, education, same thing, just put out what's required there.
Okay. So I'm realizing we have quite a few slides left, and we're fairly far into this. So
I noticed.
let's. I think we've covered most of these on the legal consideration. So just be aware that there's different things you can and can't ask for on the job application. Same things on the interview. I can't remember whether we have a list of some of
We
the
do.
questions that you can't ask on the interview. Okay, and this other point that you've made is what you can and can't do before you make the offer of employment. You basically have to do a conditional offer of employment before you can do background checks, drug tests, and part of the
Right.
reason why we emphasize these things, it's who we serve. A lot of our organizations are serving the homeless, and it's important to have drug tests if you're hiring someone who was an addict a year ago. That's a pretty important thing. And if you're, a lot of organizations, I think why they do it across the board is that way you can just say, well, we're not singling you out because I mean, if someone was an addict a year ago, they probably get it, right? But if someone was an addict 10 years ago, they may be like, why are you making me do this? So.
If I can just say 2 things real quick. First of all, it is illegal unless you treat everyone the same, consistent within
Okay,
job
that's good
category.
to know.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah,
So if you're going to test, everyone in direct service, fine, but they all have to be in the same category. You can't pick and choose
yeah,
among there. That is illegal.
right.
Secondarily, there's a bullet point that says ban the box. Ban the box is critical legislation that you can Google and look up, and we can provide a link to it as well, Andrew. But ban the box is a movement that basically says, it's not fair to punish people because of choices that they've made in the past due to criminal activity. And so now there is a number of limitations, and it's not consistent. Like it's state, it's region, it's city, it's county, it's township, it's all over the place. But it very clearly says whether or not you can even ask about convictions, criminal convictions in an application or not. And if you can't, at what point are you legally permitted to bring it up? And it varies from after an interview to not until you make a job offer. So it's really important to look that up as well, which, by
Okay,
the way, it's never legal to ask about an arrest. It is only ever legal to ask about conviction.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Now, some of these other slides that we're going to cover on religious employers and hiring and freedom, I think we're going to go into that more in depth in week 6, but we want
Yes.
to highlight these. So if you're, thinking about your hiring, that you need to recognize that there are these different categories of hiring. I don't know if there's much more you want to say to this slide, or if we
Just
just,
Yeah, just very quickly, that the organizational religious exemption applies to the organization wide. If you're going to invoke it, that everyone has to be a believer, it applies to the whole organization. A BFFQ applies to a position. So if I'm going to hire an overnight shelter manager for the Women and Children's Center, I'm going to hire a woman. So it permits me to discriminate in gender because it makes sense to the organization. Ministerial exception, we'll cover that later. And that in general, we're not an EEOC because we do have permitted legal exceptions to what is otherwise covered under EEOC.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right, that's great to cover. So I think we've covered most of this.
Yes.
Um, I often will ask about their testimony or their personal faith in the interview, and have something earlier. Um, yeah, so
And
you
we've
know,
provided samples for
yeah,
many of these as well.
having a religious reference is good. Um, I often hear people say, I mean, something like, I don't know, 70 or 80% of the country says they're a Christian, right? But, what does that mean? I mean, 70 or 80% of Europe says they're a Christian too. So, but that means they're just listed, they were baptized whenever they're an infant or something, right? So, but yeah, all right. I think we covered that. Um,
You want
it,
me to speak to this quick?
yeah, especially point D is probably the most important. So,
Right. Well, C and D go hand in hand. One
okay,
is don't overstep. Just because you may have an organizational religious exemption doesn't mean that you can then go into all other areas of protected status hiring.
okay,
If you have a religious exemption, you have a religious exemption. You don't have an exemption for gender or other things. Okay. Use it or you can lose it. If you are using an organizational religious exemption, then you need to be consistent across the board. When you start to pick and choose that only certain positions matter, you basically weaken or compromise your organizational religious exemption under the Civil Rights Act, Title VII. So it's important to understand that. And again, we'll get into it more deeply. But if you start to say just managers need to be Christians, then you're really invoking a BFOQ rather than an organizational religious exemption.
okay.
So,
Yeah. Okay. That's a good point. So this next slide, as you're thinking about your process, one key question is, does your organization have an application? Because some organizations like ours, we do resume plus screening questionnaire, which is a little different than an application. I think so. What portion of do most of the organizations you work with, Angie, do they have an application in it rather than this approach that I take of doing a resume plus a screening questionnaire?
yeah, many do for a couple reasons. One is it lets them customize, and because they have such a broad spectrum of positions to be hired, it's more people are more used to functioning within that. The other thing is an application belongs to the employer. It's a legal document that
Yeah.
is employer owned, and so that gives the opportunity to say that within the application process, and so it tends to work that way. However, I will say the exception is that when they're hiring C-level or above, they don't ask for applications. We basically go to resumes and screening.
Yeah, and part of the reason why I don't use an application is that because I would rather get 200 applicants and then screen them than if I have an application might get 20 or 30 applicants, and then it would affect my flow in the process, and I would lose people who I might want to get. But I guess it depends on your organization. I understand in terms of scaling. I also have another question that's kind of related. For most of your clients, what portion use like an applicant tracking system or some sort of HR like IT system where they're uh, you know tracking all these things in some sort of big HR system? Do a lot of them use
Most,
that?
no, most
Okay.
don't.
Okay.
They, for the most part, they set up their own more simplified version. So
Yeah.
they might have, like a form that's an applicant tracking form so that they can
Yeah.
say, has this person done this, this, and this?
Okay.
But in terms of an HRIS system,
Yep.
very few actually use it.
Okay, that's good to know. I know that that's increasingly becoming the trend in for-profit companies, and there's a lot of small business focus, but I didn't know how much that was happening in the nonprofit sector. So,
Not much.
yeah. Okay, good to know. All right. One of the assignments is to write a job description this week, so pay attention to these key components of the job description. We have some samples also that cover these things. I don't know if there's anything else you want to highlight on this.
Nope, I think
Okay.
that we've kind of hit it, and I think it's sufficient to be able to get going on the assignment.
Okay. And on the interviews, do you want to cover this?
Sure. It's pretty laid out, but define who's going to be involved in advance and make sure that they've been trained. make sure it, like I said it before, you get a couple of core questions together about what you need to know. So commonly, let me give you a quick example. If you're going to hire somebody who's going to be a grant writer, you need to ask questions and that align with your organizations. Many rescue missions or other faith-based organizations don't take government money. So if you're going to hire a grant writer, you want to frame a couple questions that would relate to their understanding that you don't take government money and their ability to work within that limitation, because that's a pretty distinct thing in that case. You also want to predefine any other questions that help you meet the requirements of the job. We talk more in the coming slides about fit, but that is one of those things that it's hard to really describe. It's like people click or they don't click. They click for personality, they click for alignment, they click for articulation of values, they click for all kinds of reasons. And that is something that you do measure. That typically comes into greater play when they interview with teammates or direct reports, but it is something that matters. Solve gaps or conflicting information is probably the one other thing that we really haven't addressed. And that is that if you have a series of information between questionnaires, resumes, and then feedback on interviews, and there are things that are conflicting or not addressed, if you've got a 2-year period you can't account for, you need to make a note of those things and try to solve those gaps or the conflicting information. I had a client that I worked with a long time ago who served time in the Georgia State Penitentiary. And so he thought that when he got out and he went looking for work, he would just say that he worked for the state of Georgia, because when he left, they did give him a check, for like $17. And, and I was like, okay, 2 points for creativity, but no one's ever going to verify that employment. So here's the deal. So anyway, it's important to do, but he was needing to fill a gap. That wasn't really an appropriate way to do it. But all I'm saying is that you want to look at all of that, because if you've got gaps, you want to ask questions like, I noticed that there's a gap here between this time and this time. Can you fill that gap for me? Perfectly acceptable to ask. So.
Yeah, that's one of the tips that I learned. Anytime there's a gap in employment, you want to ask why.
Yep.
Often there's good reasons why, and then often if people have left a job, especially if it happens frequently, where they've been at a job for a year or 6 months, I ask, can you explain why you transitioned out? And I recently had someone who basically said that her last 3 employers were horrible, abusive, and insane. And I realized that's a warning flag whenever you've been there 6 months,
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
so I think things along those lines. So so this next document is a hiring table, and essentially this is the list of who might be involved in each stage of the interview, depending on what level a position is. Is that basically what this is?
Right. And it's a sample. It's not a hard and fast
Yeah.
rule. It's just a sample.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want to speak to this slide?
It's pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah.
Just is it often, especially again in nonprofit organizations, especially those with the faith component, people are they have a emotional, personal value buy-in, and so unmet expectations are pretty tough. So anyway, this is just to illustrate that. Don't assume that just because they want to work in ministry that they're on the same page as you. You need to really, as best as you can in the process, try to set expectations and extract expectations so you can manage them appropriately.
Yeah, and especially as I get to the later stage of interviews, half of the time I spend is setting expectations where I'm saying this is going to be super intense. This might be the most intense job you've ever been in. This is like signing up for the Marines. So are you ready for this? And some people, they're like, ooh, and then other people they get excited about that, right? So there's things like that you can explain to them. So
Yep.
all right.
And asking some good questions like, how do you self-organize?
Right.
What does grace mean to you?
Yeah.
Would you, get them to really drill down. Give me an example of a time you had to invest in an employee for staff development, what that looked like and what the outcome was. Really drill down, because we can all say, "Oh yeah, the staff development's awesome, high five," and you could be talking about completely different things. So,
Right. Yeah.
all
Yeah.
right.
That's
So
great. So,
back to fit. Again, in ministry, you want to take a look at a theological alignment, statement of faith, Christian ministry. Romans 12 is a really big deal in my book, because it talks about the body of Christ and how we don't all have the same functions. And in order for a body to function healthy and well and whole, we need to respect and understand our different functions and work together. By default, people want to hire people who they like, who they think will be easy to work with, which most often tends to be like themselves. That does not make a healthy team or a healthy department. So having an awareness of that kind of helps to break that down. Philosophy of ministry, even within rescue missions, varies wildly. And so it's important to really kind of understand what yours is and how to go about finding people who support, enhance your philosophy of ministry, because it's not all going to be the same. Just because they've worked at a rescue mission doesn't mean that they hold the same philosophy of ministry. Character, and again, it's kind of the core values of your organization and the character traits that you either must have or that you prefer to have, as they are aligned to the values of your organization. Competence, that's about, can the person do their job? Do they have the functional training and skills to literally do the job? And then the other thing is, what does the position require? I want to give an example of one, because it really does make a big difference. Many people will say that they're organized. It's a very common descriptor. And then what I would go on to say is, okay, so are you organized related to people, related to tasks or information, related to process, or related to things? Give me an example of how you're organized. Because people who are organized related to people is a very different organizational skill than related to processes or information or even things. So it matters in that regard, and you really want to kind of push through and get to that where you can.
yeah.
Culture, we've talked about culture, and this just is another way to look at it, but you cannot underestimate how critical that's going to be in fit. So reference checking, I just want to say a couple things. Ideally, the same person should check references, because they get the handle of doing it. You become very nuanced in what you hear and what you say. So if I call and I say, "Hi, my name's Angie, and I'm checking a reference for an applicant. His name is Andrew Sears." And the person on the other end goes, "Oh, yes, I'm familiar with Andrew. What do you need to know?" Okay, that person's already told me an awful lot about Andrew. On the flip side, "Oh, Andrew, oh my gosh, what's he applying for? That's great." Whole different thing. So people who do this regularly hear nuances and terms. They begin to pick up on things. And so it's helpful to have someone who does this with great frequency, even if it's one person within your own department. I'm not an advocate of farming it out to every Tom, Dick, and Harriet to check references, because a lot can go wrong. There's a difference between employment verification and reference checking, and they're both important. Employment verification is exactly what it sounds like. You work through their work history to verify that what they told you they have done, they have actually done. Good faith, I just want to touch on this briefly. There's a lot of concern about saying anything other than confirming the position and the dates of employment for a former employee. The problem is that people are afraid that they're going to get sued. You really can't get sued unless you get into defamation of character or libel, which is saying things that are untrue, or you go away from the established work record. But the reality is if Tom worked for me and I had to release Tom because he was one of my donations driver, and instead of bringing back the donations from REI, he took them instead to his girlfriend's house, and they fenced all of the donated items from REI privately. That's called theft. And he was let go for theft. If Andrew calls me for a reference, and he's another rescue mission especially, and he says that he resigned. Well, that's not accurate. our work record indicates that he was released for theft. And if that's all I say, and that's part of the work record, then there is protection generally that's called good faith, employer to employer, truthful information, part of the work record related to the employee. You don't get into character defamation or character assassination. There's a protection there. So.
Okay, great.
I will hit these, I guess, now, because that's a pretty big deal. Background investigations and clearances. An employer is restricted on when certain information about an employee can be requested. A conditional offer of employment has to be made before you can do a drug test, a criminal background check, nearly any third-party consumer report, or a fingerprint clearance. You need to get a separate authorization. Anything in the process of applying for work, generally signing an application form is insufficient. It has to be separate. Many entities will provide you with their own release form. So if you use a third party for criminal background checks, they will generally provide you with that authorization form, but we have also provided one for you in the template section. And it's important that it be used after you offer employment. If the background comes back and you decide not to hire them based on the information that comes back, you have the right to rescind your offer of employment, but you must also give them a copy of the report that was the reason for your rescinding the employment. That's under the Fair Credit Reporting Act requirement.
Okay, yeah, that's great.
Here's a sample of what I encourage you is that for all the positions, you predefine the types of tests that you will need to run, because everybody doesn't necessarily need everything, but in some cases you may wish to. So this is a common example. If an organization has decided everyone's going to get a drug test, everyone's going to get a criminal background test. But an MVR is a motor vehicle record. So not everybody will need a motor vehicle record pulled. If your job is driving and it's a requirement of your job, then you would want to note that. And you want to note that by position. Fingerprint, you've got to run a fingerprint for anyone in my mind who's going to have any kind of oversight, interaction, or access to children or other vulnerable populations. Some organizations take care of older people who are in vulnerable needs of care. So elder abuse is also regulated by the need to get some fingerprint checks. And then education related. It seems crazy, but actually there's been numerous reports that say that the most commonly, people lie most about their educational attainments than anything else on their application form or resume, which is kind of scary. But I think that often it's the least checked out thing. So if you're hiring someone and a credential matters, a degree matters, licensure matters, you need to have verification of that. So.
Okay, yeah, that's great.
I should also say that setting it up before removes any kind of teeth. If someone says you're not being fair, you're trying to harass me, or you're just trying to pick on me. Nope, this is the standard. Here's how it works. These are all our positions. This is how we do it. So puts that to rest. When you do put an offer in place, you want to put it in writing and include the position, the classification, which we'll talk about, exempt or non-exempt, which is hourly or salaried employees, part-time, full-time, seasonal, start date, rate of pay, and that employment is always at will. And again, that it is contingent upon verification of documents that they have the legal right to work in the United States, and contingent upon clearing all child clearances, drug tests, or background checks. There are some sample offer letters for you as well that we've provided.
Okay, great. So the project this week is to pull together some of these, real documents for a hiring toolkit for your organization. We want it to be something that you'd actually use. You can't just copy what you're using, and you can't just copy our templates, right? We want you to apply the best practices. But I do want to show you what our templates are. In week 2, you can go down and you'll see this week has more templates, I think, than any other week. You'll see all these templates. So, it says required, but the point is for you to use these to learn from. You don't have, the point isn't to read through them. So you can look at, so what a job analysis template is this is what you do before you write a job description. And this is a template you might use in an organization to analyze a job before you write a job description. And we cover job analysis, I think, in some other videos. This is a sample job requisition form. If you're an organization that has 5 employees, you're probably not going to use this. But if you're an organization that has 100, then almost certainly you're going to use this, right? And we have a detailed job description that's following, I think, most of these best practices, that covers all these things that you could use. And for a posting, we have some just other sample job descriptions that Monster provided if you want a longer list of job descriptions. Then we have some sample interview questions. So the first part is some good interview questions. The next part is what's illegal. And then having some sort of candidate evaluation form. I wouldn't encourage you just to copy someone else's candidate evaluation form. I mean, these are very personal. It's kind of like saying, who do you want to marry? If you copy this from your friend, it's probably going to be different than who you want to marry, right? So you can't copy this from another organization. But some of the principles you might get right from this. Some of these things, are general. Is there values alignment or things along those lines? But and this is sample reference check policy for an organization, sample background check authorization form, sample rejection letters you might send to someone, sample job offer letter to an organization that exempt, or job offer letter for someone who's hourly. So we want to provide you with a toolkit you can use in your organization, but the point is you need to customize this. So for your assignment this week, you can use some of these principles, but don't just copy this. If you copy this, you're going to get a 0 on the assignment. So create it for your organization, applying some of these principles. So if you're doing a job post, what I would recommend you could do is you could use some of these sections: summary of the position, duties and responsibilities, right? Skills and qualifications, but then create your own, and then working conditions, physical factors. That's for ADA and other things along those lines. So is there anything else, Angie, you'd add to these templates?
I think that's good for now. I'm sure we'll think of something later, and I'm sure we'll learn something from their feedback.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you again, Angie, and I hope all of you enjoy working on the assignments this week and have learned a lot in this process. So thanks a lot.